Hello and welcome to the program. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe has approved a draft of a resolution that could change the rules in favor of Russia and complicate further imposition of sanctions on the Russian Federation in the Council of Europe. A final vote on the matter will be held on June 24th. To discuss this, we are joined in the studio today by Vitaliy Martynyuk. He is the head of international programs at the Center for Global Studies, Strategy 21. Hello and thank you for joining us. So the first question is that basically the Council of Europe does have a focus on the rule of law that Russia tend to disparage, to say the least. What is the motivation for bringing Russia back into PACE?
You see that sanctions against Russia were voted in spring of 2014. Just after Russian aggression, the start of Russian aggression against Ukraine, just after occupation and annexation of Crimea. So that decision meant that Russia was an aggressor, was a country which violated the rule of law, the international law, and human rights on the occupied territories. So it was a clear signal for the whole world that an aggressor could be punished. But what we see now? Now we see the way of turning Russia back to the Council of Europe, to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. And this way, this procedure is a bad signal for the world, not just good signal for Russia, of course, because Russia can be again in the building of the Parliamentary Assembly, and but bad signal for international community, because if this draft decision, because yesterday the committee voted draft decision to be adopted on June 24th. So if this decision, if this resolution is adopted, this means that any country can violate international law, human rights, and so on, and not be punished.
But because Russia is still the aggressor here, there is the Azov Sea crisis, Donbass is continuing, illegal annexation of Crimea is continuing. Why now? Why being willing to integrate Russia now? As it kind of seems that the sanctions are beginning to work a little bit.
I think there are several reasons. The first one is the duration of the war waged by Russia against Ukraine. 5 years. 5 years is enough long period if we compare with the World War II from 6 years, more than 6 years. So 5 years long, it is enough long period. And there is no active phase of this war. Just shooting along the contact line, several attacks.
You mean no big battle? You mean?
Yeah, no big battle between Ukrainian armed forces and Russian and pro-Russian forces. And this impose on some European politicians the vision that they could reach an agreement with Russia through dialogue. So I see that this position to create a window for a dialogue with the Russian Federation is spread in Europe. And European politicians would like to turn Russia back to these negotiations, to involve Russia in different formats of solving different problems in the Council of Europe, of dialogue and so on. But this vision is wrong, because the Kremlin sees the procedures, the world with other eyes, with other visions, because such steps are considered in the Kremlin like a weakness.
Weakness, yes, I would. Yeah.
Like a weakness and a signal for continuation of its aggression against Europe, not just against Ukraine, but against Europe, to break the international law, to break the European stability, to create chaos, and to, we can say, control this chaos to use for reaching the goals of Russian Federation.
But as we've seen, Russian meddling in the US election in 2016, with the Skripal case, there are proof, and Austria shows it well, that some people in the EU, at the very least, as you said, are ready to negotiate with Russia, and that also, as you said, also that Russia is sowing chaos through certain far-right parties, and there's no secret about it. Why does Europe, and PACA especially, which is actually one of the most executive power in Europe, allow Russia, which is obviously attacking Europe from the inside, to get back at the table where basically they could do more harm?
If we look through the draft resolution, we don't find Russian Federation there.
What do you mean?
I mean that there is no mentioning about Russia in all documents which concern this procedure to turn Russia back. But at the same time, we understand that all these steps are making for this goal. But why? Why? I think that European politicians don't understand properly the real threats for European stability and security. Yes, they declare that all steps are made in favor of stability and security. And this confirms that they don't understand these challenges and threats. And I think that Russia has had enough time to persuade some European politicians to support their vision of the procedures in Ukraine, around Ukraine, and Eastern Europe. And that's why the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, which is based on values, on dialogue, on negotiations, on peaceful decisions, and so on, they would like to avoid this some kind of crisis or conflicts.
Complications.
Complications. If Russia is not back in the assembly, this means that Russia should withdraw from the Council of Europe, because Russia hasn't paid financial part of contribution to the Council of Europe. And it is a crisis in the Council of Europe. And Council of Europe would like to avoid this crisis.
So better have Russia back on that matter. But it's bringing me to another issue. As you said, that certain politicians don't understand necessarily the threat posed by Russia. But I'm thinking about one country, especially Germany, who's constantly allowing and giving steps for Nord Stream 2, while trying to look a little bit strong against Russia. What's your take on this kind of double standards here?
Nord Stream 2 project does not concern Council of Europe directly, but if we look at the whole picture in Europe, yes, we can see that Berlin supports, indirectly supports the Russian Federation through this gas pipeline project, through some measures mentioned in the Council of Europe. And I think that Berlin and Paris as well, they don't want to have a conflict in Europe between old Europe, we can say, and the Russian Federation. They see the stability as a process of negotiations, a process of meetings, a process of compromises. But maybe I say it again, they don't understand the real behavior of the Kremlin.
And that Ukraine does understand that, because Ukraine is literally at the front line of this kind of behavior. How can the new president, Volodymyr Zelensky, can weigh in, and can he weigh in Europe to counter, to deter Russian aggression?
We will see the results of new President Mr. Zelensky efforts and the results of his first visit to Brussels. There is no clear information about results of first meetings of Zelensky with Juncker, the President of the European Commission, for example, and further meetings with Tusk and Stoltenberg. But I see that this visit to Brussels is a symbolic one. This is a confirmation that Ukraine will continue its European and Euro-Atlantic integration, and it is important for us. But at the same time, this visit is a neutral one. So Zelensky didn't decide to go to a capital of some country, but to European capital, to headquarters of the European Union and NATO. So Zelensky would like to make this visit
symbolic statement,
symbolic, kind of neutral, and maybe well understandable for every political parties in Ukraine and for different countries in the world.
Because Zelensky, as we saw, the meeting is happening right now. So we saw Stoltenberg and Mr. Zelensky being more or less on the same page here. Mr. Juncker thanking Volodymyr Zelensky for the role of Ukraine here. How can, so these are of course speeches in front of the press, and these are important and symbolic speeches. But how can and what is the guarantee that Volodymyr Zelensky can get out of these meetings to say from Europe, yeah, we're going to protect you and continue to protect you and try to protect you against Russia?
It's a very interesting question, but I think that, of course, Mr. Zelensky used and will use this opportunity to meet different politicians in NATO and the European Union to say again that the Russian aggression is ongoing against Ukraine, that the war waged by Russian Federation has not stopped, that there are casualties on the east of Ukraine, there are violations of human rights in Crimea, occupied Crimea, and in Russian Federation there are hostages, Ukrainian hostages on Russian territory, and it is important to provide this information from a new president and to demonstrate to both organizations, the EU and NATO, that Ukraine remains on the same position with regard to the Russian aggression. What signals can receive Zelensky from the EU and NATO? First of all, Mr. Juncker, who now is the president of the European Commission, he is at the end of his presidency.
Yeah, he's going to sit down.
Yeah. So this meeting, Juncker-Zelensky, was rather exchange of views, positions, and so on. But meeting with Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, could be very productive, because NATO plays a very important role to strengthen security and defense of Ukraine. And I think that Zelensky receives good signals from NATO that the alliance would continue these efforts to support, to assist Ukraine, to train Ukrainian soldiers, servicemen, to assist in adopting NATO standards in the Ukrainian armed forces, but not only in Ukraine.
In general.
In general, yeah. So I think that Zelensky receives these signals. But of course, we have just two international organizations, the EU and NATO, which support Ukraine in countering hybrid threats from the Russian Federation, and it's very important to combine efforts of these two organizations, because the EU is not a military bloc, but NATO is a military organization. So to combine possibilities from both organizations, it's very important for Ukraine, for our national resilience, our national readiness to counter any threats from any country, including Russia.
Well, thank you very much for this overview. It was a pleasure to have you in the studio today to talk about this issue of PAC and Volodymyr Zelensky in Brussels. That was Vitaliy Martynyuk. He's the head of international programs at the Center for Global Studies, Strategy 21. Thank you for watching the program, and stay tuned for the rest.